Welcome to the next episode of Chill God Talks. If you haven't seen it, you should go back and watch the last video. And I have just got into this year's theme, and we're talking about, well, the reason why people will fall away from the Lord is not because they intend to, but because they fail to prepare or properly set their heart on the things of God. Set kind of like concrete. And I have a small talk series that goes into the scientific outlook, as well as where it's proven that having your heart set on something is how manifestation of healing, prosperity, and all the above takes place. So we are actually looking at Rehoboam, who was the grandson of David and the son of Solomon. And when he took over the kingdom, because Solomon had turned away from God in his latter days, in 1 Kings chapter 11, you can read that he actually made idols to all the demon gods of his wives. And because of that, God had a prophet come and prophesy to Jeroboam, who was one of the generals in Solomon's army. And that's different from Rehoboam the son. But the prophet said that God was going to give him 10 of the 12 tribes of Israel, and he is going to rule over them. And he was taken away from Solomon's descendants, but not the entire group, because he had promised David that since he was faithful to him, he would always give him someone to sit on his son's throne. So 10 of the 12 tribes were going to be his, while the other 2, the tribes of Benjamin and Judah, were going to be given to Rehoboam, the son of Solomon. And this was prophesied by God. So when Rehoboam became king, the people came to him and said, Solomon taxed us. He said he taxed us and made our yoke grievous. And they asked him for mercy. And they said, can you lighten the load on us, because your father made us serve with all this hardship. And he said, give me 3 days and then come back. And first, he went to the counselors that were with his father Solomon, and he asked for their advice. And they said, if you will serve these people today, and will listen to them today, then they'll serve you forever. But then, he went to the young people that were with him growing up, and they were basically show them who's boss. You flex your muscles and show them that you are in authority. And tell them that your little finger will be thicker than your father's thigh. And your father chasing them with whips, but tell them that you will chasten them with scorpions. And basically make them submit to you. And so Rehoboam forsook the counsel of the old man and took the counsel of the young man. And went back and answered the people kind of harshly and said those things. And the people were basically forget you. That's how the 10 tribes broke away with Jeroboam to be ruled over by him, like the prophet prophesied. And now those 10 northern tribes were referred to as Israel, while the 2 southern tribes were referred to as Judah. After this happened, with his 2 tribes, he decided that he was going to try and reunite the nation, them and the 10 tribes of Israel, by force. So he basically was going to start a civil war. He had assembled hundreds of thousands of soldiers to fight this war and reunite Israel. Also, as well as the food to support them and all the equipment they needed, the wagons, and in modern terms, millions of dollars to assemble this army and start this war. So right before he engaged, a prophet came to him and said, this is God's punishment. This is God's punishment upon Solomon for the way that he lived. So even though this was never his will originally to separate the nation, but because of the sin of Solomon, this was now God's will. God was the one that put Jeroboam in charge of the northern 10 tribes. And if you go and fight against them, you'll be fighting against God, and you will not prosper. So really get the picture here. This is the guy who said, my father chasing you with whips, but I'll chasing you with scorpions. And had flexed his muscle and spoken these arrogant things. And then this prophet comes along and tells him this is wrong and you shouldn't do it. And Rehoboam humbled himself. He humbled himself and he responded to this prophet. And he disbanded the army and sent everyone home. And so you can see his heart was tender to the Lord right there. Or right here, he made a mistake listening to the young men, but when he was confronted by the prophet, he humbled himself. And it says right there that in 1 Chronicles that he sought the Lord for the first 2 years of his reign. And that he did good. And not just in word, but he disbanded this army at great expense and even humiliation to himself, because how he was bragging about his power and how great he was. And yet he humbled himself. And this was good, but it says right here in 2 Chronicles 12 and 14 that he did evil because he prepared not his heart to seek the Lord. And this is what I want to share with you, how to prepare your heart. And this is like a vaccination that eradicates a disease versus a cure that only takes away symptoms for a period of time. And a good example, I want to use David as an example. Over here in Psalms chapter 57. Alright, so this isn't in all Bibles, but the subscript says, the chief musician, Altash Miktam of David. And it says, when he fled from Saul in the cave. And so this is talking about David when he was anointed to be king. He was about 17 years old, and until he was 30 years old, so for 13 years, Saul just hated David. He took his wife away from him, which was Saul's daughter, and gave her to another man just to hurt David. He tried to kill David twice with javelins. And then he took his army and tried to encompass David. And there was one time that he had 3,000 men who were chasing David. This is over in 1 Samuel chapter 24, like verse 2 and 3. So here was Saul with 3,000 men, and David with 600 men. So David was way outnumbered, and David was hiding in this cave. And Saul came in to cover his feet. And, that doesn't really compute with us nowadays, but it was basically to rest, take a nap and whatnot. And you can see this because David's men said this in 1 Samuel chapter 24, verse 4. And it says, and the men of David said unto him, behold, the day of which the Lord said unto thee, behold, I will deliver thine enemy into thine hand, that thou mayest do to him as it shall seem good unto thee. Then David arose and cut off the skirt of Saul's robe privily. And, so he couldn't have cut off this unless he was asleep. So David stopped his men from killing Saul. And so you can see for thousands of years, this is the way that kingdoms changed hands, which was through like a military coup. So people wouldn't have considered this wrong if David would have just killed Saul and taken over the kingdom. After all, David was the one that got anointed to be king, and the anointing had left Saul. And it would have been better for the kingdom if David would have done it first. Second, Saul was David's father-in-law, and just to hurt David, he had taken his wife and given her to another man, and that was terrible, and, that was an insult. And Saul was out to kill David, and that's why he was even there. Third off, he had 3,000 men who was trying to kill David. So most people would have considered this self-defense and or vengeance for what he had done to his wife, or just this is how kingdoms switch hands. So nobody would have blamed David, and as a matter of fact, all his men were encouraging him to do it. And most people in a situation like that would have caved to the vengeance, the hurt they had experienced, or just the way it's done, self-defense. They would have justified it. And they would have killed Saul. But David wrote this psalm, Psalm chapter 57, during this time when he was in the cave. And this is the psalm that he wrote about. And I'm not going to take the time to go through the whole thing, but if you go to verse 7, and it says, "My heart is fixed, O God, my heart is fixed. I will sing and give praise." Alright, so the word fixed right here is the Hebrew word kun, Kuwn, which is the exact same word that was over here in 2 Chronicles chapter 12, when it said that he did evil because he prepared not his heart to seek the Lord. So part of preparing your heart is to fix your heart or establish your heart, to predetermine some things. Proverbs 23:7, it says, "As a man thinks in his heart, so is he." And your heart is the thing that determines the way your life goes. Jesus said in Matthew 12:34, "Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks." In Proverbs 4:23, "Keep your heart with all diligence." And it says, "For out of it are the issues of life." So see, people try to change their actions and say, "I don't want to drink anymore. I don't want to smoke anymore. I don't want to do this." And they try to change their actions, but don't deal with their heart. And when you begin to recognize on a heart level that your spirit man or woman is the real you, and that as Jesus is, so am I in this world. 1 John 4:17, if you change your heart, then as you think in your heart, that's the way your life's going to go. Or that's how it's going to be. There are many of you watching right now who are trying to change your action, but haven't changed your heart. And the way you think in your heart becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy. So you will eventually act out what's in your heart. For a brief period of time, you can act contrary to what's in your heart, but that's hypocrisy. But as time goes by, your life will ultimately go in the direction of your heart. So if your heart's not been fixed, as David said right here, that hasn't been set, firmly planted in a direction, then when they are telling you to kill Saul, and to take vengeance, and to take over the kingdom, you would cave to that. But you see, David had fixed his heart. He had predetermined that he would not touch God's anointed. He said, someday Saul's time to die will come. He'll die in battle, or something else will happen, but I will never stretch forth my hand against God's anointed. He had predetermined in advance. He already decided how he would live, who he was, and what he would do. Even when he was in a pressured situation where they were trying to get him to do something different, he couldn't do it because he had fixed his heart or prepared his heart. And the application for us is that we have to prepare our hearts. And truth is, living under limits and establishing boundaries for yourself and saying, this is who I am, and I will not go outside of that. That's freedom, true freedom. The person who says, oh, I'm just a free spirit and I'm going to do whatever the situation demands at the moment, or whatever you feel at the moment, I tell you right now, that's real bondage. To be controlled by your emotions, that's bondage. Those are traits that Satan looks for when he says he goes about seeking whom he may devour. He will devour a person that with that character flaw and keep you in chains and bondage to your emotions. He'll turn your sadness suicidal, or turn your anger into hatred towards one another, and holding your hands in chains at a ransom, keeping you from reaching out and taking what God has for you mentally, spiritually, and financially. And I pray you're receiving this.